So the basic idea is to provide content for free to patients who couldn't make the conference. But you are the patients who could make the conference. So thank you for being here. And please take a second and introduce yourselves. And then at a later stream, Aaron, I will apologize for my summer patients.
Well, I guess I am also a patient, but I'm a dentist.
You're a dentist?
Yes.
All right. So introductions, please, Rosie.
Hi, I'm Rosie Bartell, and I'm a patient advisor from the state of Wisconsin. I've done a lot of work both in measurement, but also in quality improvement. I've done it throughout the United States, but I also, during COVID, did a lot of international work and have done presentations on 6 of the 7 continents.
It's brilliant. I feel very poorly traveled right now.
That's right.
Rosie, we were having a fascinating conversation about patient stories for continuing medical education. Is that right? Is that something you're working on?
Yes.
Could you tell me more?
So basically, several months ago, I was approached by the ACCME and said, how can we start using patient stories as part of our credits? And I said, well, because I believe patients tell their story for a purpose. And that purpose is as much important data as all the other data you collect. And so those patient stories really end up being like a learning health cycle. Your story is the initial data. Then from that knowledge that they gain from your story, they create new actions, they collect new data, and there's new patient outcomes or new patient stories. And so the cycle for all of learning health systems start with patient stories. And the more that, so basically I was then invited to their conference in Chicago last spring, and am writing a paper with a group of people that work in accreditation, and basically we have a meeting tomorrow afternoon to finish it. And very much my voice is in that paper because, and since that meeting, literally every conference I've presented at, any presentation I've done for any hospital, anything I've done pretty much is they now give credit for. And they now are starting to look at it as, here's a patient that I know that does this same kind of work I do. Let's look at how she does things and let's give her credit too. And I'm just working little by little to change the voice of patients.
So I know we're time, but I want to try to contextualize for the stream. Physicians and nurses in the United States are required to maintain their education by going and taking classes. And you'll go to a conference, it's actually like Datapalooza, and you'll actually see little signs like this. If you're in this room, you have to register over here to get your credit. Right. And in this room, there's a session going on. It's not been approved. And so if you go in there, you can listen all you want to, but it doesn't count for your continuing medical education requirement. And so every year, physicians and nurses, and I think there's actually other professions that are the same way, are required to go take these classes. And so the idea that patient stories could be a part of that is a way for, I think the right way to say it is the way for the exceptions and the odd circumstances and the uniqueness of patient stories, right? That is very typical. You go to a conference like Datapalooza and you'll hear these really incredible patient stories about things that have happened. And they illustrate in many cases things you cannot learn any other way. So the notion that could be part of formal education and something that doctors would seek out, dentists would seek out, is amazing. It's an incredible idea. So I applaud your work.
Could I add on to that a little bit? Because there's one piece of
I don't know how much time we have.
Who are you?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah,
who are you?
I just want to highlight the importance of that, because research shows that if you talk about like a single person's story, it's very, very memorable. If you talk about 3 people's story, it drops dramatically, right? And so individual stories as a species, it's the best way to get across information. So I think it's very important.
Very valuable.
I will add a comment from off camera. This is Erin Moore.
This is Erin Moore off camera. Erin will eventually come in front of the camera.
I will eventually come in front of the camera. But for years, I have been doing like, I did some with Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and then I did some with Hershey Medical Center. I get invited to a class of pediatric pulmonary fellows. where my son and I give a presentation about what it's like to have cystic fibrosis, both from a caregiver's perspective and from the kid's perspective. And more than anything else I do, I get people reaching out about how impactful it was. Yeah, it comes back around, and I hear stories about how, oh, well, this pediatrician or this fellow told me that they had heard this mom and son speak, and I was like, I think that might be us. Like, I think that might have been our story. And it's the stories that they're latching onto that actually make the difference.
Yeah. So Greg Merritt, I would describe myself as a patient partner, but to extend this, actually, one of the things that I always wonder about, so that's really important and it's critical, and I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad CME does it. It makes me though wonder, my patient questionologist hat comes on and says, well, what if that became actually a curriculum? So it's not actually you're there for your story. Yeah. Yes. And you've co-created with the faculty member of record on whatever kind of class you want to have that says, we're going to now co-teach this, exactly. Co-create it, co-partner. So yes, my story will be a part of this, but it's not the only thing. Because my worry in most medical education is that you have people hear stories. They're impacted by that, but they're not staying up all night for that. They're not saying, okay, I got to figure out how to do this better. So the impact matters. Now we say, okay, let's use Rosie's story, sit with the faculty member of record who's trying to create the curriculum for that class, now co-create the class. Now we have a 4-credit course that is a part of the process of medical or dental education that goes forward.
So I have made some inroads in that, Greg, in that I wrote a book, and it's a very little 115-page book, but it's basically about my experience.
It's more than the 5 pages I can write. So
that's good. What's the name of your book?
It's about my experience and how I use that to educate. But it's called Rosie's Story of Faith, Hope, and Survival. And basically you can only get it through me because I've signed and autographed every copy and made it personal. But that book is now used by a professor at Harvard as her textbook.
That's great.
And so that is an inroad. The other inroad I've made through this is that a company that does credits, so they create little episodes or events. They call them events and episodes for helping, online, helping doctors and nurses get those CMEs and CEs without having to leave their building. And so they ventured out and reached out to me and said, we want to try doing Patient's Voice as a whole series. And so we are into 6 episodes, myself doing some of them, and also I brought in a couple other people. So I'm bringing in people with stories, and we're doing these 20 to 30-minute episodes. When, basically the woman who decided to do this was in our work group for the paper and said, let's try this. She sold it to her boss on a whim, and then immediately within the first week of the first episode dropping, I get a letter from PCORI, because I'm a PCORI ambassador. And usually when I get a letter from PCORI, it's about, would you do an interview with this newspaper or this magazine or something, or this TV station? But here it is, a letter they received about one of their PCORI ambassadors who had done this terrific episode that they were now using to train pharmacists in California, and that how great this episode was. She said she couldn't run fast enough to her CEO to show him that we are making a difference. But it's, that was the kind of things I've been able to do. But I believe, from day one, I kept going to I work with a school of nursing, but they invite me in once a year to tell my story to the nurses. But I keep saying, let's do a curriculum. Let's my background is education. I wrote tons of curriculums. Yeah. And so, I know how to do this. Just let me at it, and yet, it's hard to get inside the door. But I believe every day I get another toe in the door, and eventually we're going to have curriculums that are going to be patient developed and patient managed.
That's your
book. That's
okay.
the book. Yes.
We showed this for a second on the stream, so that'll be nice. It'll be a an advertisement? Are you throwing it up on Amazon for download?
No, and
or-
I haven't at this point. But if you, my email is Bartel, BARTEL 1949 @gmail.com. You send me an email, I will send you multiple ways of getting it.
Great.
I wrote a book too, not to called The Patient First Manifesto.
Have you written a book?
I have, but it doesn't really count as
Oh,
a
really?
PhD book. Those things never count. They have long
Oh,
titles.
PhD.
And they,
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think
All written books. It's
well,
good to write books.
because as someone, so I'm Brian Laskin, I'm a dentist, and I do a lot with standards in dentistry, standardization and innovation. I create technology for dentistry, but then also education. And where I think this, Rosie's story is really pertinent too, is that as healthcare providers, I think we're very greatly disconnected by patients, but for a good reason. We're trying to provide high quality care. And particularly in dentistry, when you're working on, people are freaked out. You might have heard that some people have anxiety about going to the dentist.
I'm really not even comfortable sitting next to you.
That
I like
has
to
nothing to do with me
think
being a
of
dentist,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
my
fear-
partner just
I'm on
through
the,
osmosis. I think she heard this on the phone, and she's now.
It's not okay. Yeah, we're on the 8th floor, and I got a fear of heights, and now I'm sitting next to a dentist. It's not a good day for me.
But if you think about it, you're doing microsurgeries all day long on people that are freaked out. So as healthcare providers, you become desensitized to what people are
Necessarily. Yeah.
feeling, right? And bringing in stories like Rosie's, I think, would help, because really, I think what healthcare professionals need to flex is their compassion muscle and not empathy, because empathy means you absorb people's problems, right? And that's a distinction, I think, as if we're going to be educating the healthcare profession. I think that is, empathy can be detrimental.
Right.
So we avoid it. Did you agree?
Yes, 100%. I mean, people will pick up my book and they'll say, I saved it for a day when I thought I could cry, and then I laughed when I read your book, because, I got through this with humor and with a lot of involvement with lots of different things. And I have to tell you, IHI created a video, an 8-minute video 12 years ago that is still used around the world. And that the 8-minute video is called One is Too Many. And when I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, my counter was dirty. And I mean, it was the day after I had my first amputation. So I've had 3 amputations. It was the day after I came home from my first amputation. They came to my home with a camera crew and then an interviewer, and they did this video, this 8-minute video. And it's used by hospitals for orientation. It's used, people will call me from, like from China or from Japan, and they'll say, we saw your video and we wonder if you'd be willing to talk to, have an interview with us, or would you be willing to meet with our doctors or with our staff? And I'm like, that video is so old, and I really, but it from day one, my whole theory was, I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me. I can't change what happened to me, but I want to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else. And so how do I do that? I figure out, why did it happen and what can we do better? And that, so I started out mainly looking at hospitals and where quality improvement. And then eventually my whole measurement world came bouncing back to me, because that's what I did in my past life and research. And I remember saying to my husband all the time, I need to get into research, because that's where the answer is going to be found. Eventually, we're going to find the answer to this through research. And so I do work with researchers. I work with, quality improvement. I work with, 2 weeks ago, I spent a full day doing 6 presentations on 6 different topics using my story at a hospital where everybody got CMEs or CEs for every one of the presentations that they attended. And, and I felt really good. And somebody said, so I started at 7 a.m, finished at 6 p.m. And somebody said, are you getting tired? And I'm like, no, every one I do, I feel more invigorated, because I see the lights going on. I see the people hearing. And, this is not the first time I did a presentation for this hospital. This hospital has literally brought me to the table, 6 years ago, and I'm there all the time. And that's not teaching a class, but that's embedding me into everything they do.
I have a question. What do you think How do you think we can measure the success of your efforts to show the value they contribute toward healthcare improvement?
Well, I think that as soon as we realize that, it's qualitative, not quantitative data, but every patient story is data. And when you tell those patient stories and when you use those patient stories, you're going to be able to collect data. And and the more patient stories you collect, the more data you have. And I literally, when I leave a session with physicians and with whatever healthcare worker, it might be facilities, it might be environmental services, it might be construction companies, but when I leave them, I always say two things. I say, first of all, you might have a story and it might need to be told, and let's tell your story, and let's figure out how to tell your story because it might need to be shared. And secondly is, when you look at what you did here today as a healthcare provider, no matter what role you had, and think about the person you love the most. And then would you want that person to be a patient in this healthcare system tonight?
Well, I
Can I really quickly? I want to be conscious of the fact that it's 1 o'clock, and some people maybe want to go to sessions.
Right.
If you want to stay, we can stay and talk about this for as long as we'd like to.
To answer your question, not directly.
I don't have anyone.
Does anybody want to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
1/3 of
Thank you.
medical mistakes are due to miscommunication, right? You hear that data and that fact, and it doesn't really resonate. If you told the story though of somebody who was the victim, or I don't know how you would call it, the patient that was on the other end of a medical mistake due to miscommunication, you would bring that alive, right? And then you could back into the data from a patient story, right? And then there's obviously going to be downstream ROI benefits from that. That's how I would imagine that.
I think actually the question is, it's an interesting one. I hear it all the time, like, what's the ROI for having patient partners involved in it? It always makes me wonder, is that even the right, is the ROI the right question, right? So if actually this is about care and it's about changing a system that everybody recognizes broken, the issue, so no one would start an innovation saying, my only goal is to do the ROI side. They first by answer a question that matters deeply to them. Question that matters, we have a broken system. How can we fix it? Well, here's one option is to say, what if we partner more effectively with patients and their care partners and say to them, bring your whole self, bring who you are, your patient hat. That will be really critical for us. We'll learn about that because we'll humanize what happens in a system where when we go in, the paint looks the same on the wall because everything looks the same on the wall because it's just paint to us because we come here every day. If you're a new patient, you're looking at everything trying to say, hey, this. So this becomes an opportunity to say, okay, what can we learn from patients? But equally important are, what have they done in their lives that could help to see healthcare in a new way? If I'm an educator, a truck driver, a plumber, an architect, and you say, here's what I'm struggling with. I can't figure out how we do this better. How would you do it in your field?
Yeah.
The opportunities for innovation explodes because now you have people who don't think the way, right? You can't unknow what you know if you're a clinician. You can't unknow it. But you can get a perspective from somebody who's saying, we would never do that in our field. That's not how education does this. Or that's not how, as a truck driver, I would solve a problem doing this way. Why do you guys do it that way? And that's the could be, right?
Well, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And still,
Aaron, you can be on the stream.
We are resisted, right? Generally speaking, we are resisted. We are pushed against. They want to empower patients. They want to engage patients. They want to equip us with knowledge and tools and all this other stuff. And then the second that you are smart enough that you know how to work their system, now you're aggressive and now you're, too much. You need to sit down. You're not representative. You're the 1%.
Your story is oddly specific.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think.
Right. So the reason that I'm bringing that up though is because it's it always seems to come back to value. The American healthcare system values money.
Well, that's where leadership matters, right? You brought it up. Like, that's where you have to get clinicians involved because nobody became a
Sure. Yeah, you better get in.
I could sit up here and just talk to myself all afternoon. This is I'm gonna let other people talk. Go ahead.
I think you probably need to think about what it means when you say the words, I'll let other people talk. But
Yeah,
But
no,
I
Just sit
have
on
to
the edge
tell-
of the couch. I will sit right there, and I'm going to move the camera so that you can see everybody.
I have to say that
And you,
You
if
know-
you want, we can make space for you too.
Quinn.
Okay. All right, can you look there and see if you can see yourself?
I can see myself, but now we can't see these two. So turn more. Keep turning. Keep turning. A little more. Are we still live?
front end. You need to
No,
sit closer.
we've
You need
done
to
this
sit
out
closer
loud.
to the dentist. I know you don't want to.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed the dentist.
Yeah, I don't have-
Unlike Fred.
Well, thank you. James. Thank you.
Well,
Even if
maybe
it's
you
not
got
true.
the dentist-
Now my partner,
Yeah.
no, my partner has some real.
Well, now you
problems.
moved it again. You got to turn it.
You
You
know,
got to. You can't see Rosie at all.
I can't see the picture.
All right, that's good.
I see
That's
you.
all you
Rosie.
need to do.
Yes, and we still have a spot for you in the middle here.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And you're welcome.
Right.
well, what is
To be in or out. You're welcome.
you know, leadership is what I think would be the answer here, because nobody went to medical school or dental school or became a healthcare professional for the ROI of it, or I think
True.
probably very few. And if you look at like what happened with Southwest Airlines, to your point, right? The reason why they had that big mess was that their CEO was replaced with 2 CFOs, right? That then just didn't see the ROI of fixing their system until we all know what I'm talking about when I say
Yeah.
Southwest Airlines, right? And that's what's going on in the healthcare system right now. In my mind, my biased mind, that clinicians should be leading it, not CFOs, right?
And yet, the hospital where I am so extremely successful is a hospital I've never been a patient at.
Mm.
Okay, I'm not. They came looking for me because an anesthesiologist heard me speak at a conference and said, she's from Wisconsin. She's right down the road. Why don't we have her working with us? And so they approached me. I said yes. I definitely will come and I'm fresh eyes.
Rosie must have a softer approach than I do.
No.
I mean, I think,
So
first of all,
basically-
Aaron, just briefly
so-
introduce yourself. My name is Fred
so
Trotter. I'm
What
a-
happened is, basically they got a new CFO or CEO, and she basically said to all of her people who were doing quality improvement or who wanted money for anything, if you walk in my office and you don't have a patient with you supporting what you believe you need, then you might as well walk out the office. And she was that involved. She wanted that patient story to be connected to everything, and basically I can walk up to Chris and say, you're doing a lousy job at this here, or you have these group of clinicians who aren't even on the same page as you are, and one day she described me at a talk by, she's a tough ass. And I'm like, oh my God, nobody's ever called me a tough ass. But I am, for her, as the way she looks at me, it's like, I'm going to tell it to her straight. And I'm going to tell her the truth. I'm not going to sugarcoat it because I want to work. I want to do work in her hospital. I'm going to tell it like it is. I want to share my story, but I don't want to share my story bad enough to give up my principles.
So this stream is with the patients. I apologize. My name is Fred Trotter. I'm a healthcare data journalist. You are,
Aaron Moore,
and you are like, why are you here?
extraordinary.
Extraordinarily humble.
Exactly. No, I have 5 kids. My one of my 13-year-olds has cystic fibrosis, and my 14-year-old has type 1 diabetes. So I am a patient advocate, big proponent of learning health systems, human connections architects.
So the premise of this, and I'm telling you, and I'm telling the mostly the audience, is Datapalooza has always been a patient-centered conference. It's hard to come in a recession. It's hard to come when there's a pandemic on. We knew that patient attendance would be down. We are here providing kind of free content from Datapalooza precisely because we want to continue to have Datapalooza have patients at the center. That's really important to Academy Health, and they're being very generous with allowing the speakers to come up. We've already had some of the main stage speakers come and speak. We'll have that again, and so what I would like to hear from everybody, even the dentist, even the dentist, is
Especially.
as a patient or as a patient advocate. In my case, I'm thankful to say that my healthcare conditions are run of the mill. I'm here, because of stuff that happened in my family is what got me into this. And so I'm closer to your seat than anything else. I'm a professional in the space. But what brings you here? What hopes do you have at Datapalooza? Is there something very specific? This is the place where policy and data come together about how they impact patients. And when I say that, what does that bring to mind to you? What message do you want to give, and what are you here to learn?
Well, first of all, I'm here to learn how do we connect that policy and that data, and how does my story start to affect policy? Because I'm not the guy who's going to be at down the street at the Congress, or that's not who I am, but yet I want to change the way we do things. I believe that I'm with Greg. We have a broken system. It's not like, and I don't believe anybody understands how broken it is some days. You can get up there this morning and say, we know this is wrong with it, but let's talk to the people who might have ideas of how to fix it, or might be able to tell their story, and you might figure out, oh, this is why we're broken. That story could help us solve why we're broken, rather than, I have to tell you, as a patient right now who does measurement work a lot, and then what's happening with CMS and the change of who they're working with and all that, some of us are nervous because we're thinking as patients, we might be pushed out again. And I've been hearing it from patients across the country saying, are you sure that this new group is patient orientated, or because everything you read, it looks like they might be clinician orientated?
So let me think. Can't remember. Were we both at the Pink Sox meeting last night? At some table, we had a conversation about what does it mean to be patient centered. It might have been breakfast.
Yeah, it was over.
Was it breakfast? Okay. So I'm going to ask you that question in a second. What does it mean to be patient centered? But while you think about that question, I want to know why you're here and what data you're interested in.
For me, what Datapalooza is, so I heard this, I think probably at this conference, right? So data is just a point in time where the tears wiped away, right? So data is really, every time somebody says data, you say, well, that's the point of reference, looking at an electronic health record, but all the tears are wiped away because all those things represent things that say, here's what this means. So for me, it's trying to personalize this in a way that so I do a lot of work with PCORnet, which is a network of networks across PCORI that does a lot of clinical research And it's a place where I constantly say, who gets to decide what the right questions are to ask? How do we take that data and interoperability and not forget that each one of those points is a human being, not a data point? And how do we make certain that the people who are on the study teams that make a difference have people representing that? So I often hear, in that group, when I first started joining a couple of years ago, they would say, "Oh, that's just a data study," and I would happily help them to say, "Made of who?" It's not a data study. That's not. So whatever questions you're asking about data requires you to have somebody in that patient group who could say, "Here's how I think about this problem that you all are trying to nerdily go through and see what's happening with this data set that you're looking at." So and then the second part for me is learning. I mean, it is most of the acronyms, most of the things, all the stuff are like fire hose kind of stuff when I first heard it. And so
we're trying to fix that a little bit. In fact, let me turn that around to you. What is PCORI?
A patient-centered outcome research institute. So it's again through the Affordable Care Act was funded to do comparative effective research to be much more patient-centered, which I'd love to have this conversation about that because if I were to have named PCORI when it was named, I actually think it's misnamed. Right.
Oh boy!
And the reason it's misnamed,
saying that on camera,
the reason is the reason I think it's misnamed is because when I first heard the term, right? So I was a cardiac arrest and heart attack person some 11 years ago, so I had no idea I was going to be doing any of this kind of work. And when somebody in 2016, I think, said, "Oh, we're going to go to this patient-centered conference," and I thought to myself, "What's the alternative? Like, isn't all dentistry, healthcare, shouldn't it all be patient centered? Like, what's the only alternative is to say it's clinician centered, it's hospital centered, it's something else. And so when we use that term, I think we lose the opportunity to shift the language to say, well, what are we trying to get at? If the goal is for you and I in this dental patient relationship to actually have a relationship, one of care, and one of which we both have expertise. I can tell you what I'm going to actually do with my teeth. You tell me to floss every time, and I say, I floss occasionally. And I say, here, I'm supposed to floss, and then I do it right before I go in, and bloody gums when I show up because I've done it to the last minute.
Anxiety building. Go ahead.
But the point is, we actually both share expertise. I know me best. You know what it means to do things with teeth. And if we believe that's what the relationship should be about, then we need to call things that do research or do practice patient partnered, in my view, because it creates this connection with one another that says we're in partnership with one another. And it requires both of us, not you to just center on me, but both of us to be active engagement in managing whatever the thing is going on. And hopefully for the future, to think about a way in which that transforms healthcare so that things like shared decision-making aren't just sort of little models. They're actually borne out in the ways in which the relationship between healthcare operates. Even adherence bothers me. I think, so it's better than compliance for sure. But I actually think it's more concurrence. We've agreed this is the thing. We're in concurrence that I'm actually going to do this thing. And you do this because your expertise told you that this is actually what's going to be best for people like me, and I'm in agreement with that, and so I'm going to concur that I'm going to take medicine X amount of times per day and all the other stuff that needs to happen.
So what I'm trying to do is prepare you to have the questions. You took both questions.
Sorry.
It's great. No, I mean, I'm trying to make it easy on people to have a second to think. But now you can say why you're here. And if you feel like it, you feel free to jump in and answer the second question too, which is the topic of like, what do you think when you hear patient centered? Or you can wait. But I want to hear what you said. So you haven't heard the second part. You haven't done either, right? On camera. You've said so much.
I did say a lot.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear you little.
That's right.
Well, I'm here for very actionable reasons. So I'm writing standards on interoperability for dentistry and building also.
Fire stuff?
Yes, but expanding upon that. So I have a platform called Tooth Apps, which you can think of like the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store for dentistry, but it's really an HIE, right? And we're connecting dentistry to medicine, bringing in the
What's HIE?
Yeah, well, the Health Information Exchange.
Thank you.
Sorry. So basically the data transference, like
aspiration.
And if you think about it, if you think about it, like there's my chart, and my chart exists because the electronic dental medical records have been opened up so patients can view their information. Go ahead and ask your dentist, if you have one, for your electronic dental record, right? You'll get like a crappy print off, and it's not possible. And the reason why is because dentists don't even have access to the data that's legally owned by patients that they're the stewards of because of some anti-competitive monopolistic behavior and information blocking, which is now recently illegal, right? And so I'm trying to see how can we crack that open, give patients access to their data, give dentists access to the data so we can, I don't think there's a bigger problem in dentistry to solve. And nobody in the industry in dentistry is talking about it yet, but that's why I'm here, because I think dentistry is 20 years behind medicine, but we have an opportunity to not bring the issues that we all are kind of recognize what's going on in medicine to dentistry. I think dentistry can be a model for other sectors of healthcare. So that's what.
And start open notes in dentistry.
Right.
What's that?
And start open notes in dentistry.
Open notes, yes,
So
totally.
you'd have opportunities to actually shift the mentality to say they're not notes written by the dentist; they're actually our notes.
Totally.
That I could actually contribute to, and say it turns out that
And that's
that
the only
filling
good
is not
one.
so great.
That's the only good one. Notes.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, you're right. So I've never even thought of that. I love the concept of patient partner, but I think the piece that needs to be added to whatever that means is getting the patient's perspective. We almost have to merge both perspectives, right? Which is impossible to do. So I don't know how to do
Well,
It's not impossible.
it was like 10 years ago, we were sitting outside of Medicine X at Stanford talking about a co-created medical note. Remember this?
I'm still interested in it.
Where, similar to a Google Doc,
So are the
the
open notes
doctor is
people.
taking notes in blue and the patient is taking notes in
Well, that's our notes. I mean, it is
red or
moving to that.
green or whatever it was.
It's happening.
Right? So
Versions of that are happening.
that's like open notes is access, right? Like I can see what my doctor is writing about me, but I want to make sure that
Well,
not just my report of my visit, but because my visit is a stop on, it's a blip on the radar. It's
Right.
not, it's a mark. When the doctor says, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "Well, because you told me we had to come quarterly."
Well,
That's why.
and I have to tell you that there's Open Notes 2.0, and I'm very deeply involved in it. And that 2.0 is the patient's voice being so much more involved, and also
Yeah.
looking at not just that one visit, but that
Yeah.
whole partnership, and what does that mean? And what is your input and what is my input, and you being able to say, hey, you didn't get what I really came for.
Yeah.
You didn't get my message. You didn't hear me.
Yeah.
I came because of this reason, and you wrote something completely different in my
Right.
note. And so, can we talk about that note, and can we change it together? And that's and it's being done in a few choice hospitals on the East Coast that I work with, but it will be coming to everybody very, very soon. And
It goes back to this idea of compliance versus adherence versus
Right.
concurrence. I just recently, unfortunately, had a doctor who, so I type 2 diabetes because I love pizza and I love food. I love to eat, and I eat it when, as a coping mechanism. And I'm doing a pretty good job now of not doing it as a coping mechanism, but I did it for enough time that now I have all the problems with metabolic syndrome that I'm painfully aware of the irony that I'm a person who researches these topics and is now subject to them. But my physician was having a conversation with me about the fact that I do not take my metformin regularly, and he prescribed one of the injections, and I'm not taking that regularly. And he, we had a whole little discussion that where both the terms adherence and compliance came up, and we had a little kind of miniature debate about what was going on. And his point was, look, I've done my part. I put you in a position to do the right thing as a patient, and you're not doing the right thing as a patient. And he's 100% right. And do I love the fact that compliance was his term as before adherence? Not. I don't care for that very much. But at the same time, on that day with him, his job was to say, look, I'm a little frustrated here as your clinician because, like, we can talk about different plans if we want to, but no plan we can talk about is going to work if you continue to overeat and you don't take your meds. Right. So, there's a lot of conflict in the basic, clinician-patient relationship, and sometimes the conflict flows in the other direction, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, you're not listening to me, or hey, these things are happening, and I think these are part and parcel to the world of clinical healthcare. These are the gray areas that we all kind of wrestle in, and the question that I think we ask at this conference, and we don't perhaps ask at other conferences, is the technology in the way, or is it at least letting the conflict happen without making it worse in some way, right? And the fact that you couldn't see your notes before the area of open notes, that certainly made things worse. Like, open notes has definitely made things better.
Yeah, for sure, no doubt.
I think some kind of our notes or co-editing or something would make it better, but at the same time, when you have the oh my gosh, I went in and I talked to the doctor about X, and what he or she wrote was Y. There is a conflict there, and now maybe instead of a new appointment that gets made, now it's you edited something or you did something. So now there's a different medium under which these conflicts take place. I'd love to hear you talk more about the kind of conflicts that you've experienced because I know you've had a lot of conflicts. That's what I like about you is you have conflicts and you have funny stories about your conflicts. But could you talk about when you've expressed them over digital mediums? Like, does that change things for you? Does it make it better? Make it easier? And it's okay. The answer is no. It's okay.
I don't think it's yes or no.
Okay.
And it's happened over time. Like, I think I was maybe a little bit ahead of my time.
Yep.
Right? Like, the effort and the energy that I put into trying to fix things that I perceived as broken because they weren't working for us was so resisted. Even when I was like, no, I'll help fix it. And everyone's saying, it's not the system, it's you. And I'm like, no, it's the system. Just because others aren't elevating this, it doesn't mean it's not a problem. They don't have the tools, or they haven't been empowered, or whatever. You name it.
It's you're a lonely voice, but not a lonely problem.
And
Is that right?
I was. I don't think I'm a lonely voice now. I think
there's totally, of course.
When people are.
So may I, for the sake of our audience, because this is a permanent thing. So it's right now, maybe there's hopefully, I hope somebody's listening to this. Maybe there's patients listening, but this is going to be out there forever. Cystic fibrosis is a perfect example of a condition for which there is a fundamental disagreement between clinicians and patients. And the reason, of course, is that the infection risk of going to a place where another person has been treated for cystic fibrosis is the central risk. And so, like, there is a basic core conflict that I think you handle by the way with great grace. And no, seriously, I think you do.
I'm not sure everybody would agree.
Because you laugh about it, you make it funny, you tell the stories, you put pressure. I mean, I think in all the ways, all of us are agents in the healthcare system that are facing this particular problem in a way. We have to make constant decisions about how nice we're going to be, right? Do we want to be friends with the CEO of the hospital, or do we want to let the CEO, know what's going on? In my case, there's a government administrator. I've given them a FOIA request, and they have not answered my FOIA request, and I want transparency on a whole section of the healthcare system. And they smile at me and they shake my hands at conferences and everything else. And I want them to like me enough to give me the data, and I don't want them to like me enough to feel like they cannot give me the data, right? So we are all in this constant. And I think this is a kind of I think it's common for patient activists, where we're always trying to ask, am I being too mean? Am I not being mean enough? Am I, how am I balancing this stuff?
Maybe.
But just to be clear, so what I wanted to make clear
Do you
is
think I'm mean?
Yes, totally.
You do?
Oh yes, in the best way. Like
yeah, I cry. So
okay, there you go. So
by the time I'm
I
done
don't
crying,
think
I
I'm
figure out a
mean.
better way.
I think I'm direct, which can feel abrasive.
Well,
I think I can
that's
be
what I'm saying.
intimidating
mean is
with that directness.
mean is just whether or not the knife has cut you versus cut
But
something
I
you
think-
want cut. I mean, it's
But
just,
I think where it comes around, especially with patients, is that we're driven by like a moral compass, right? Like I had a sick kid. I had no choice. I had to do this. I'm sorry if you don't like me because of that, but I'm going to continue moving forward, right? Like, no, you cannot be on our team. No, you cannot be on our advisory board. No, this is too controversial. All right, I'll go somewhere else then. Like I understand your position, but I'm going to still continue. You're not going to deter me from this. And I think we could make more progress if we did it together. Now people see that, right? Like now it's come back around, but we needed some space. Like we converged, then we had to diverge. And now we're like now that there's other people, now I'm not the lone nut dancing in the stadium, right? Like now I have
You have a following.
First follow.
people that I can point to. And I'm like, maybe they were the lone nut also, right? It's a community. So
Right.
not a following, but I think like I have a respect and an admiration.
We have our own
for,
games.
yeah. And I fight for what I think is fair.
Well, I mean, being an agent of change, right? You need to, by definition, step outside of the norm in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or form.
So
And
Aaron,
a lot of times-
my question to you is, when I now bump up against someone who doesn't hear me, who doesn't want to be my partner, who doesn't think,
Yeah.
basically I'm a complete belief in what Greg said. This is, patient-centered care is is the outcome that might happen from research. But
Yeah.
I'm a partner. I know me, you know medicine. Let's work together to create the best situation for me or for my child or for my loved one. But Aaron, for me now, I just walk away and go to somebody else.
Yeah.
I now know there's people out there who also believe in what I believe in on the clinician side. And so I don't have to continue with this
I
clinician.
agree.
And and I give them the benefit of doubt. I usually call them, I write them a letter or a note.
Well, I think this is the difference between fighting the battle and fighting the war. Right? Because I think that all of us in this conversation right now probably have the means to switch to a different hospital if it's not working out. But not everybody does. But not everybody knows that's an option.
Right.
So I can pull that privilege card and say, I'm going to go here and I'm going to do that and I'm going to go wherever and I'm going to speak to Congress and I'm going to call this person and we're going to do our thing. But not everybody can. It's not that I think I need to save everybody, but I think that I have the capacity to be like an ice-breaking ship. Like I will keep beating at it until it is loose enough that other people have a chance to see the light shining through and start to ask their own questions. Like what I think I have been trying to do is create and support the creation of a movement around this because we're all doing it one at a time.
And what the other side of that is inside your own inside systems, there's that clinician who is stubborn and doesn't want to. And I'm living in this world. I have all the answers.
Yeah.
You need to be in compliance. You need to follow me, and I don't need to hear you. And then right next door, maybe the office right next door, might be the person that really will hear you and will talk to you. And I had to find a new family physician after 20 years, and so basically my family physician healthcare provider retired. He had a small office. He brought in this young woman. When I met her, I brought my book so that she would understand who I was. And I even by the way she took the book from me, I thought, oh, she really doesn't care. But I said, okay, I'm gonna try. I tried for 6 months, and basically every time I never even ended up with an appointment with her. But every interaction I had with that office became a battle. And finally I said, I'm done.
I'm already spending so much of my energy trying to take care of me and my own.
Right. So basically I went online, found another clinician in that same organization and made an appointment online on a Monday for a Tuesday because I didn't want to back out because I was afraid that I would just say, well, I don't know this person. And I get to the appointment and I brought my book and I handed it to him. Now he's exactly the same age. He's exactly the same, a young doctor who, basically out of med school, just out of residency, about 2 years, probably did residency together in the same community. But anyway, he said, oh, you're my first author. That was, and then as he sat down next to me, like knee to knee, and basically that computer was there, but it wasn't important. He started talking and asking me questions, and we started talking about my health history. And I immediately knew that between Monday morning and Tuesday morning, he'd gone and found my record.
Yeah.
And had researched it by the questions he was asking me. And and everything he did as a partner with me. It was like we made decisions about how we were going to go forward.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like for me, I have so many other specialists that I only need my family doctor if something else goes wrong, or I have 2 medications that I have to get filled by him, or her, and once a year. And by the end of the appointment, he said, well, basically, would you talk to this doctor, and when you get blood work by him, would he check this blood work? Because I noticed that nobody's done that for a while for you. And I said, yes, that I will talk to my hematologist that they check that blood work. And he said, And basically, you and I need to only see each other once a year unless you need me. And that's exactly what I was trying to say. Is I don't need another doctor appointment. I need people to hear me.
Yeah.
I believe so strongly in partnerships. And that it is. I don't believe I know everything about medicine. I don't, but I do believe I know everything. I know who I am and how I interact. And it's not. People come to me and say, "Well, tell me how I should interact with a doctor." And I'm like, I can't tell you that. I can tell you what you need to look for in yourself and what makes you happy and what makes you feel like you've connected with a physician, and that's who you need to go see. But I can't tell you just because this doctor works for me, it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And Brian, I have to say something to you. Do you come from the state of Wisconsin?
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
I'm rounding out the Midwest here.
Yeah, but my question is,
Great Lakes.
have you and
I went to college with you.
I been on an interview together
It's possible.
about and I was very. It's probably the worst interview I've ever had, where they were looking for people to help them write these policies
It's possible.
I was very direct about. I didn't think you knew what you were talking.
Oh, really?
Not you.
It's quite possible I didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't you, but it was somebody else on the call.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there were two other people on the call. You were very supportive, but the other two people were very. And basically, I said, I don't think you're ready to have patients involved.
Yes.
I've said
we were on that call.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh,
Because I mean.
So you remember that?
Yes,
You're
I
welcome.
do. I do now. I can't remember exactly what the call was, but that has been an eye opener for me when I got involved with standards in the first place.
Yeah,
I was talking to people. I think it was around the standards stuff.
Right. Yes, it was.
And I was saying we should have more patient voices, and the response I got from the other people was that patients don't know what's best for them is exactly what was said. And so I actually led the creation of a second standard development organization called the Dental Standards Institute. And now I'm actually doing work there, but then also with the other organization, which is the American Dental Association. Right. And,
it was the American Dental Association.
So I hopefully that was probably 5 or 6 years ago, right? And I think it's changing now because I've not at least on a institutional level, not at your local dental practice level, right? So, but it is. I think it's. I mean, patient advocacy is not a thing in dentistry, right? And we're talking about that's. I think the reason why. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to have any pain like 98% of the time in a dental practice today, but yet people are still afraid of it, right? And it's because of the propagation of this disconnection between patients and professionals, I believe.
I think like this, when you're saying, well, that was 5 years ago, like I think what I've learned through meeting other patient advocates and working with a whole variety of different organizations is that like improvement doesn't happen overnight, right? And so if the first time they see or hear interact with my perspective doesn't feel good, I feel more optimistic now that they will come around to it, right? Like I feel less inclined to force it on them unless it really is a matter of like health that needs to be addressed immediately.
With them in the last year.
But
it was the same thing.
Oh, really?
Oh,
let me ask a question because you've both said this. What does it mean when an organization is not ready for patients?
You'll know real quickly. You'll feel it. You'll feel that they want to direct what's going to come out of your mouth.
Yeah, they want
to control how you're going to speak. They want to control what you're going to say. They want to, basically, they don't want to be
associated with somebody who's going to be disruptive, that's going to create more work for them or more perceived work for them. So if I have a personal blog where I'm writing my opinions and my experiences of working with this organization, and they're like, well, you can't do that. That's against our policy. And I'm like, that is against the policy if you are an employee, which I am not. And they're like, but you work here. And I'm like, as a consultant.
because they went through the PFA network
Yeah.
and looked for patients, American Dental Association, to work on this, and I think it was still the standards.
Yep.
And they so PFA network reached out to me because I only have a half a palate and I have implants from here to here because I had a tumor in my I had a malignant tumor in my cheekbone, but they didn't know that, so they kept taking my jaw, my gums, my teeth, and my palate. I don't have a sinus on this side. And so now I have a rib and titanium plates. I always say I had Face Off before the movie Face Off. And so I have a story, and a very painful story about dentistry. But they didn't want to hear that story. They wanted me to say that dentistry is this, beautiful.
Well, yeah. If we use dentistry as an example, an organization that would not be ready to partner with patients would invite somebody like Rosie to come into their meeting and then say, these are the problems that we want your help with. And I would say, those are the problems that you think we have. Those are not actually our problems.
And that's exactly what they did. Yeah, and basically said to me, well, your problems are not the problems we want to, that's an exception to them.
They're ready if they are willing to listen more than they ask. That they're ready if they are, they don't lead off by talking about how they would love your perspective, but they really can't afford it when they're a nonprofit and their CEO's pulling in, a cool, what have you, right? But they would be delighted to bring pizza in to the dinner and expect me to take a day off of work.
But now we're doing it virtually, so that we don't even get the pizza.
Now, right.
But the pizza was nice.
And it's generally tokenism, right? So the moment that you're tokenized is the moment that you realize, and it's not hard to, and it is uncovering that to find out, well, why are you inviting me? Is the goal to check the box or to say that's a great flyer and please somebody up the ladder that says we're doing patient-centered work because we had 4 patients come in and talk about how the flyer that we put together was fantastic.
Especially with PCORI grants where patients are supposed to be a part of these different things.
Well, so that's actually
and just banging the drum. You're not doing it. You're not doing it. You're not doing it. What's my job? I'm part of this grant. You're not involving me. This is why we don't involve patients because you make a ruckus. And I'm like, I don't think I'm the problem.
Well, what's been interesting to me, I've heard this a lot actually. The sort of you could be. We want Rosie because she's different than others, but she's a special patient. Because if you disrupt, right? If there is a disruption, I always ask the question. Okay, so you're telling me that you have no clinicians in these meetings that are ever disruptive. Like those folks are like totally on board always with everything you have to say. Yeah. And it's sort of this absurdity to think that somehow the fact that somebody raises an issue is going to be about the patient who raises that issue. And we can't have that, even though there's 3 clinicians that everybody in the room hates, that they've had trouble with trying to manage all the time, and you're missing it. So I actually think there is opportunities, right? So for me, the hope is clinicians now know and understand. So you hear more about burnout, more about the system failing, and it is the system. So they're well-meaning people trying to do everything they can, and the system's beating them down, this industrialized medicine. And so I think that's where there is a togetherness. So if for those out there, I would highly encourage the Patient Revolution and look at Victor Montori's work. Right. It is a great example of where we both have a common interest that together we know that dentistry isn't working as well as it could be. Here's all the things that could fix. And here are a set of patients who'd say, I'm with you. Let's do this together to get to a place where careful and kind care for everybody is the norm. It's the standard. It's not Casey, that there isn't more patient burden, right? So that's one of the things we talk a lot even about clinician burden, hard to get everything done. And so what we've done as a system is actually say, let's pass it along to you to have the
Yeah.
burden.
Right.
So if you could go pick up the labs, if you could go
Yeah.
do all the
Yeah.
stuff that actually is going to be much more burdensome for you, that will make our system more efficient. And all we've done is passed it along
Yeah.
to the care partners and the patients to say, could you do what we should do? But it's too easy for us to do it. If you do it, it's on you.
Right.
And who, of course, is the person with the most burden. They're only there because there's some
There's a
issue
massive
that
burden.
yes.
Or we're no longer filling prescriptions because we're just a little office. You need to call the system that you already have.
Yeah.
Right.
You
And
know,
it's your
it's
job.
it's
That's
a,
right.
it's a
It's yet one
system where
more-
I developed the MRSA. You know, and yes, I do work with some people in that system, but I don't want to be calling their. I chose this small clinic as my primary care because they cared about the person. That was, you know, the predecessor and the founder of that clinic, who was my primary care physician. I remember him telling my husband the first time we went, I was patient number 26. So I was there the first week he opened the doors, and he told my husband, he said, the first time I don't really care about you, and I care more about what I'm doing or but I don't listen to you and I don't care about you. You call me on it. And that was his mantra. And he always said it. He when I got sick, he literally handed my husband his cell phone number and said, if you have any concerns about what's going on with Rosie and you need somebody to talk to, here's my cell phone number. Call me.
Yeah.
No matter if it's day or night. You know, and David did call him. And when somebody in his office acted out and didn't follow his mantra, he would, David would call him and say, this is what's going on in your office.
Smaller, like community-based, independent
Right.
facilities, I think, have the capacity to do that because they're not as constrained by all of the rules and everything that a larger institution might have. However, the downside of that, and this is just coming from the fire session,
Right.
is that they're not running certified EHRs, so they're not held to the same standards. So I have
So
this great primary care doctor, but all of my primary care information does not integrate with any of my specialty care information because that is with a health system and primary care is by myself over here in this little corner. So the patient has to make a choice
Well,
So
choice
now
and have
where
the
I
burden.
have-
and have the burden, right?
And so again, for me, one of the questions is there's lots of these dashboards, right? Everybody uses a dashboard to figure out where they are. How many systems put together a dashboard to figure out what the burden is on the patient? We have it on everything else. We have efficiency on here's how fast the clinician gets through for the colonoscopy.
Well, they
Here's
show efficiency of their
That's what I'm saying.
system.
So I'm
they-
asking, what if we actually had let me understand your burden so we can figure out what's there, and let's get that to a place that
Let's
says,
do it.
So one of the things that we're project I'm working on at Karen, and this sounds like a small thing, and because you're talking about something really big, but this is, I think, the kernel of change. I hope it's the kind of things that Open Notes has been in terms of just changing the dynamic. Is and I sit on the little committee on Karen that's the patient committee, and what we as a committee came up with is what we really need Karen to do with the fire standards is to have a way for patients to have an app that will report when they have been inappropriately surprised by a prior authorization request. It's like I go to the pharmacy.
Mhm.
I'm going to pick up
Mhm.
the medicine that I need for my
Mhm.
kid, for myself. It's absolutely critical. And then when I get to the pharmacy, I find out that something is wrong. The payer needs to have, and there's a prior auth process. And then you dig in and you find out, well, not only do you require a prior auth, it's the insurance company asking something that they should know full well that you have this condition, or you have this problem, and so you need this medication or whatever it is. And despite the fact that they knew that, or they should have known that, they cut you off for a couple of days. And of course, if you're a parent or you're a caregiver or yourself, you're like, if I don't get this done, this could cause me grave injury, or I could die, or I am going to get this done, but I know that now I'm going to miss a birthday party or some other event. And,
Exactly.
it's like birthday parties sound trivial unless you're absolutely certain that it's probably the last birthday party
Right.
that you're going to be able to go to because
Right.
that's the chapter that you're in. And so all we wanted to do is have it so you could have an app that would use a FHIR protocol that would say, this happened and it shouldn't, and then use the fact that you as a patient have the right to append to your own record under HIPAA at your doctor's and just say, we just want to write it down. We just want it to be in a note that we've appended so that it's part of your medical legal record, because then people like the coronet, people like who do the research across the systems, to be like, how often is this happening? Is there a payer who's doing this more than somebody else?
You're
is this
asking
happening?
a patient to play the long game.
No, I mean,
because they will report it, but there will be almost no chance of any immediate action.
So the what I hope the app would double as is the way that you communicate to your provider to get a prior auth. So you complain and say at the same time, hey doc, I need you to call my insurance company and fill out their prior auth paperwork. So that conversation needs to happen no matter what. But what's happening all the time right now is you call your doctor, you make the complaint, and nowhere is it written down in an accountable way that call was necessary. So you're already doing the work to communicate this. So all I'm saying is that it should be recorded. The first version will make a note. I mean, and again, this is all perspective work. I haven't done this. This is just the idea. First version will make a note. In the second version, we're going to ask that there be a new part of the FHIR record that is just for this. Right, so that there is a log of this, so that it's a kind of part of the record that is not doing anything else. Because the first version is just going to be a generalized note; it's just going to be text, plain text in the record. And so what we hope is that we can start exercising FHIR as a way to allow patients to communicate back to the system in a way. I'm on the outside of what you normally call the system, but I'm having a shitty time. I'm sorry. This is going to be a PG-13 stream. I'm having a bad time, and I want to report that. And the case that I think is really, really to talk about your idea, where it's like you've drawn the circle here. This is what the system is, and this thing needs to be efficient. The classic example of this that people don't talk about, and I can't say this definitively because I haven't seen anybody really carefully research this, but it's probably because it's not possible to research, because it is exactly this problem is. Part of the reason we had the opioid epidemic, and again, what I don't know is how big of a part is because people would get 2 prescriptions for whatever it is, right? And that actually would be controlling their pain. So maybe they're using 150% of the opioids that they needed. And they'd be going along fine, and one of them would be coming from their surgeon, and one of them would be coming from and nobody knows this, nobody cares. They're not doing anything dishonest to have these 2 opioid prescriptions, but they were using both, and that is how they were controlling whatever it is. And then people like me built the integration for the pharmacies to be able to talk. And every state got these networks to be able to.
But it still happens.
Hold on. So now there is a meta awareness where the doctor can see that prescription has taken place and that they're getting 2 prescriptions, and the system knows that you're getting 2 doses. Well, what happens is you go in to get your prescription, and you call your prescription, and the system will have cut you off. So they cut all these people off where they're just like, you were gaming the system. We figured it out because we did the data analysis, and now we've told your surgeon that they're going to be dinged because they were participating in your overprescription, and they said the same thing to your primary physician. And now you, person who needed 150% of the opioids to control your pain, you are now cut off completely. Yeah. And so what do they do? Well, I mean, very frequently the people chose to go get find their local friendly neighborhood dealer, and they started on, and they were careful. Like they used the smallest amount of heroin they possibly could. But if you get stuff to control pain on the streets, it's not like they give you like, well, we're going to warm you up to the, it's just like, what we have is heroin. What you can have is heroin. So that's what you're going to get. And then the pattern is you get cut off because you got caught. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't lie to anyone.
Right.
You were never deceptive in any way as a patient, but you got caught. You got cut off, and then you're slowly taking more and more and more and more and more heroin, and you're trying to control it. But if you're like, heroin is not an easy thing to dose.
Right.
So you're going like this. Your opioid use is going up, and most people who die from opioid overdoses are not actually doing it because they kind of go up. Because as you crawl up, your body's processing it more and more quickly. The people who die from opioid overdoses, they get cut off for some reason. Their supply, their dealer comes out, they go to jail, they get off, they have these horrible experiences as they detox, and then they go out, they still have whatever the underlying pain is, so they take it again and they make the mistake of taking the same amount that they did, not understanding that amount will not kill them. And most of the people die from this. And if you look at the time from the opioid crisis, there are two factors that happened with the opioid crisis that were really tragic. One is that we got very high quality fentanyl coming in from China. That was one aspect of it. The other aspect is they started to happen 1 to 2 years after all the states deployed these systems for the opioids. It's a perfect example of what you're talking about what we did is we thought of the system like this. And I talked to the people who ran these systems, like they're all great. We've got all these people and we catch it all the time and we're doing all this great work to do this. And I'm just like, you're measuring only half of the problem, right? You're talking about all these people who are dying from drug overdoses. You're measuring half the problem. You're not following the story of the person who got cut off and figuring out what a person did after they got caught doing too many overdoses. You have no idea how often people were doing that deceptively or weren't. You don't know what their motivations. You didn't interview them. You just cut them off. Mm-hmm. And there's very good evidence that the way to treat opioids is with medication-assisted therapy. And that's just what people do now. But but there was no MAT when they made the decision to use these systems to cut people off, right? So it wasn't like, hey, we're cutting you off of opioids and you're now going to be transferred over directly to this clinic and they're going to give you the medications you need to get off of this, and they're going to find a way to maybe control whatever pain it was you were treating originally, and None of that happened, right? And so people talk about the opioid crisis, and from what I know, there's all of these experts who talk about it and don't mention the fact that this is absolutely one of those problems that is created by thinking of the system as we're very good at the system. Now we've pushed the management of medications, that's over here. And if you need a walker, that's outside over here. And you talk to somebody else about this. And, if you need follow-on care after you leave the hospital, that used to be something that we did with our internal SNF, but we sold that to investors a few years ago. So that's pushed out here. But boy, things are going well in our square, right? And so I think actually dentistry is something that's all, in some senses already been pushed out, right?
Oh yeah.
To think about dentistry as a separate problem is a perfect example of that.
Well, a huge factor in the opioid crisis, right? Because most people get their first dose after having the wisdom teeth taken out, right? And so
they get more than they probably need because they don't. I mean, dentists aren't trained, and I've been once involved in a lockdown. A lack of a lockdown in a clinic because they didn't have a plan, because a lady my age or older pulled a gun on her physician because all of a sudden they had cut her off of her opioids, and with no reason, with the story that you just told. And here is this poor little lady got cut off, and so what did she do? She brought the gun that her son owned to the appointment, and the name of the place is in circles. So basically the clinic's in a circle like this, everybody's in the middle, and they had no plan of how to get all the other people to safety. Plus this lady's now standing in an office and they're saying, this woman's going to shoot this doctor, and because all she wanted was somebody to hear that she didn't do anything wrong. She needed this for her pain. And why did they all of a sudden cut her off? Because she didn't understand. She didn't understand. I'm 80 years old and I don't understand.
Saying she didn't do anything wrong. I mean, she brought a gun to the clinic. That's
Well, yeah, but I mean, up until that point. But my story with that primary care doctor leads back exactly what you're talking about. Is I needed a prior authorization. Her office decided they were no longer going to take care of prior authorizations, and they kept blaming. First, they blamed the pharmacist, then they said, "Oh, now you have to go to the hospital and get those prior authorizations through them." I mean, it took me a month and a half to get a prior authorization for a medication I've taken for 10 years.
My son has a genetic illness.
Yeah.
And they would say he needs a prior authorization. I'm like, nothing's changed.
Well, and that's what
he was born with this. It's the way he's built.
Yeah, there's no gene therapy
that qualifies him for the medication. Well, now there's gene therapy.
You know what? I ended up. You know how I finally got that authorization? I ended up calling the retired doctor who still had my file in his files at home. He went into the file because he hadn't literally been completely retired. Went in, did my prior authorization, and in 10
horrible
minutes
for
I had my
everybody.
prescription.
That's why they're not exactly payers. We should stop using payer. Maybe it's partial payer. Maybe it's occasionally we'll pay.
Right, yes.
But the
They're
notion
not
that we keep
consistent.
using
Yeah.
payer
Yeah.
is an obvious misnomer.
Misnomer.
Because
Yeah.
it's 2. It's a 2.0
Well,
payer.
There
I
are
can't
a
remember
problem.
who we were talking. I think we were talking about all the conversations. Datapalooza blur, but I was talking about somebody. It's not like prior authorization works well for the payers. It's not like it works for the insurance companies.
No.
Like it's a bad experience on their side too, right? So it's one of these things where we just kind of, it's like car wrecks and drunken driving before they made that a crime. It's like the system isn't working for anyone.
Mhm.
It's like it's dangerous for the people who choose to drink. It's dangerous for the people who just happen to be out on the road. It's dangerous for everybody. It's a shitty system, and we need something better. But the problem is that there's no incentive. There's a very powerful incentive to keep doing it the way it is, because if you take 1,000 patients and each patient is on a $10,000 a month drug, and one of them is like, I'm getting this medication, I don't really need it, but I got a prescription, I'm just going to pick this up. One patient. Well, that means it's worth it for the insurance company from a financial perspective to do a prior authorization on 1,000 people and interrupt 1,000 people to figure out which one of the 1,000 people doesn't actually need their $1,000 a month medication. Maybe because somebody died, or maybe
wish it
because
cost $10,000 a month, Fred.
I
That
know,
would be
that's what I'm saying. I'm
nice.
just saying the math is in favor of them jerking patients around
Yeah.
fundamentally. And as a result, it's very hard for them to get over that approach.
Let's
But it
grab
doesn't
our
actually work
torches.
that well for them either.
Work for
It
the
doesn't work
payers.
for the insurance companies either. It's not an efficient way to solve that problem. It's just what they have. So it doesn't work for anyone.
Well, but when I think about the solution, so I like the solution of saying we've got to somehow document.
Well, at least a start.
It actually makes me wonder, what if we keep pushing back on whose burden is that, right? So how easy can we make it? So every time I think about anything that we're going to say, this actually will help to solve the system, 100% agree with that. Now the question is, how do you make the ease it so frictionless for the people who are having the most burden? Is the question that I think developers and those who are trying to do this need to think about, right? Because it doesn't seem like much until it's the 17th thing you have to do for the third child.
Right.
Then you say, wow, pushing a button, easy. Pushing a button, going through the whole process, calling somebody, making all of that is the stuff that keeps adding to what it is to be a care partner or patient. So again, the more we get knowledge and information about frictionless change, the more we help.
Well, there has to be an incentive too, I think, for the different parts of the system to work together, right? Because
Correct.
we have copay assistance cards that will cover the cost of the prescription on a 30-day supply, but insurance requires that we get a 90-day supply.
Right.
So then we have to pay 3 times the copay that the assistance card would cover if it was only 30 days.
Right.
And I will sit on the phone with these
Right.
folks every month and
Right.
talk about this stuff. And they're like, they're just the call center representative.
Right.
They're not the decision maker. I'm like, I'm not mad. Thank you for calling me and listening to me and explaining this. Can you connect me with this person? Can you, right? But like, what's the incentive for the pharmaceutical company to work with the insurance company, or the insurance company to make things easier for the patient or for the clinician? Like, everybody has their own separate
They all live in
incentive.
their own silos.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the pattern that I'd like to see start happening with data is that step one, data creates transparency, right? Because right now, it's crazy. Like if you go to Twitter right now, you could find someone complaining about prior authorizations.
For sure.
Right now, there's someone on Twitter out there
It
who's
might
like,
be me.
could be,
I don't even know. if
could be.
Could be
You
me.
can find someone. So the first thing is to get transparency and get some data on the question. Then to create friction, like some kind of thing where it's not the same thing as an incentive, but it's just not easy to ignore the problem anymore, right? And then once you have friction, then you can talk about changing incentives, right? Because CMS cares, they really do. Some of the payers care too. won't blanket statement say that all the payers care, because I know that's absolutely not true. But there are people at some of the payers who give a shit and would do the right thing if the right thing was obvious. And so it's not just all money, but I think there's a ladder of kind of getting things done. And I think in general, we've done an amazing job. Like Open Notes is a thing. It's a whole thing. And everybody knows about it now. And that's a perfect example of the ladder. Like they were like, we're going to get one site to do this. And then we're going to try to get a couple EHRs to do this. And then we're going to try to do this. And we're going to try to do this. And after a while, they're saying things like, we are now a standard and we need to think about how to be a standard.
And
right?
the cost of the pace of that progress is human lives.
I know, but the choice is not go fast or go slow. The choice is go slow or get nothing. So I guess we'll go slow.
And I have to tell you, my daughter was on the other end of that, on the insurance end for a while, and worked for an insurance company who then she had to push the button for the prior authorization. And eventually she couldn't do it anymore because basically, there were so many prior authorizations coming so fast, and basically none of it made any sense.
Yeah.
And basically it was, when your thing came to the top, they pushed the button. It wasn't like there was any reason why they pushed one button or the next button. It was just, it took that long for your authorization to come to the top because they would have thousands and thousands of authorizations an hour, and so, she said, Mom, I can't do this because there's people's lives I'm playing with and I can't do it, and so, that's exactly what
sounds like you raised her right.
That's exactly what prior authorization is all about, is that we're playing with people's lives. I now know that if I have to get my authorization re-upped, I go asking for it a month ahead of time because I know that it's going to take a month. And it's not, you're right, it's not the insurance company's fault. It's it's whoever's in the middle there who has to push the button. And
I mean, I don't even I think the real problem is that the button only does one thing. Like there's the only role that your daughter could play is to be like, these have come due. Well, it's like, why do they come due? Well, some machine has been programmed to make sure. Okay, well, somebody programmed the machine to make that so. And that's the person who needs to be convinced. And it's not an easy thing because you're talking about redoing this. It's exactly the Southwest Airlines thing. Where it's like, oh, we're going to have to tear out a bunch of plumbing. You want it to work differently? Oh, you don't know how much plumbing we're going to have to tear out and replace with all the plumbing that works the way you want it to work. Why should we do that? The plumbing works fine.
But
right?
Tomorrow
except
they put
there's all
somebody
this
else in her
friction.
spot.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And all they can do is kind of pull the lever on whatever this is.
Again, you could follow the incentives. I'll show you the outcome. And part of the incentives for insurance is the things, we can give them grace and say, here's the things that are trying to do in a system that's broken. You can also say, who are they beholden to, right? So is insurance intending to try to break even? Or is it trying to actually assure that so people own stock in insurance and shareholders care about how much money you make? That has an effect on whether you pay or don't pay,
right?
Because those things matter. And again, there are good things about this. You can make an argument to say, that those things are trying to help people choose wisely, right? So you do have some individuals trying to game a system. At what cost is it for all the people who aren't gaming the system? Yeah. And at what cost is it about the idea that if our profit margin is 12.2%, that's better than 12.1%?
And then you throw in people like myself or your son who have a disability, who have something from birth on, and you now have, I said if we would treat our normal patients, our run-of-the-mill patients, the way we treat people with disabilities, there'd be an uprising in the streets, and the system would get changed. But most people get that one prescription done once a year or two prescriptions, and they don't live in the world that Aaron and I live in, where you have to.
I don't live in that world, but I've visited.
Yeah, and I have to tell you that I did a self-determination presentation for the conference in Boston. It's a virtual conference, and it's dropping on May 13th. And I reviewed what I said last week on this conference call and for the webinar, and I talk about that. I talk about the fact that if we would treat people the way we treat people with disabilities or with special needs or with extra, have comorbidities, if we would treat other people like that, who have just the run-of-the-mill things, and we would, but
Yep.
there's that whole suspicion that we're out to get something. And even though there might be a 0.0000% of people that are trying to work the system, why am I being punished because of some person out there who might work the system? Why don't you spend your energy figuring
Yeah,
it
you have to show the irony
so
of it.
weird. Like it's like, is there
So
some
we now punish
is there some person
everybody.
out there who's
It's
like getting
this,
an extra bottle of metformin?
It would be
Yeah.
like me.
Street value of pills of like half a cent per pill. It's like, you don't see people on the edge of the street going, here's your
nobody's
metformin.
selling
I would
metaphor.
say, Fred, this is a great live stream for a guy.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It's interesting because and I had this conversation with the gentleman who drove me to the airport, who was, works in facility in in one of the healthcare systems I do work in, and he said, Rosie, tell me, he said, my wife has a CPAP machine, and every time she needs something for it, it's a whole big process. And I said, well, you ought to know what I went through to get this chair, and you ought to know what I said, you have to jump through so many hoops.
Yeah.
And it took me a year
Wow.
to get
People in this healthcare system do not have an equal chance of a good health outcome.
right.
They just don't.
Right.
That's
again,
what I want. I just want everybody
Yeah.
to have the same
A
chance
level playing field.
at a good health outcome.
and it's embedded cruelty.
You don't
Right, it's
also
not
want them to have a
intended.
good one? It'd
I
be
want
okay
them
if
to
they
have
were
a good-
all
I
equal
want
and
them to have a
bad?
good health
Quality
outcome.
of
But
life.
Fred, you have a chance at a good health outcome, but you're making the choice to continue eating pizza and not take medication, right?
Yeah.
But you still are able. You're making that choice.
You have-
It's
you
my
have more
choice. You have the
control than-
same chance as a good health outcome as the next guy,
Okay.
right?
Fair enough.
I think that this live stream is getting kind of long.
It is getting long, and I was going to offer, do you guys have quick summary thoughts?
Yeah.
2-minute summary. 1-minute summary.
For me, it's like I'm glad we had this discussion, and I believe that I don't believe big things are going to come from it, but we're at least giving people things to think about and to talk about, and maybe to say to somebody else, am I in partnership with you? Are we partners, or are you just dictating to me? Are you just wanting me to be compliant? Or look at your healthcare situation and saying, is it a partnership or is it compliance? And if it's compliance, is that what I really want? Because people, will, the world will change when people say, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to want to be the person who just says, I'm going to be compliant. The world's only going to change when everybody says, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be compliant. I want to have a partnership. I want to have a say in my healthcare, and I want to go face to face. I want to go knee to knee with my caregiver, and I want them to know me, and I want to know them. I mean, by the time I left there, I knew where he lived, how many kids he had, what was his intention of staying in that little town that I live in, because that was why I never used a family doctor in the town I lived in, was because it was too little and we lost those young doctors so quickly. So, basically that was my question immediately to him was,
It's a lot of work.
how long have you been here and how long do you plan to stay?
Right.
And why are you staying here? What is your reason? So, it was a give and take the whole time.
Mm.
And I left there feeling like I had had the best experience in medicine I'd had in years.
Sum up.
Just a question. What if patient partnered care in practice and research was the start of the movement that actually changed healthcare?
Yeah, I here to learn about data interoperability in medicine and the fact that that's so tightly connected to the patient partnering piece is I wasn't even anticipating coming down here. So I think that was this whole discussion kind of highlights that
We're
in a big
aha
way.
moment today.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to look at or hear our voices in our stories and say that, have other people say that they're complainers and they'll never be satisfied, when really I think that we are acutely aware of how much progress we've made and how much more
Progress
there
there
is
is
that
to
still
do.
needs to
Yeah.
be done. And I think that gets overlooked. So like I'm trying to make an intention of not just focusing on what still needs to be done, but also remembering and like building on what is working instead of trying to only fix what's broken.
I always say I
That's
worked
great.
for the Catholic Church most of my life, and I thought they moved slow. And then I started getting involved with medicine, and then I realized how slow Laura could move. But I agree that we need to sometimes just step back and say, we have made progress. I look over the last 13 years of me doing this kind of work and say, things are different than they were 13 years ago. And I have to celebrate those accomplishments as we then say, let's use this accomplishment to go forward.
That is an incredibly good thing to end on. Thank you guys so much. I really apologize for being late and not being here on time, especially since you've had such an amazing live stream. You give me such a good time. So with that, live stream people who watch, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And I think this will be online forever now. So, you can find it. And I think I did. You recommended a book. I put it up for a second.
perfect.
So
Thank you.
it was there.